My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 67 years old, and I live in a small town just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. For 38 years, I taught third grade. For 43 years, I baked Christmas cookies with the same old recipe card my grandmother folded into smithereens. For the last 3 years, I have been a widow, keeping our house tidy and the herb garden fuller than Harold ever thought necessary. That garden is where one small, unremarkable secret lived. A pinch of lavender and a bottle of vanilla I made myself. And it is, absurdly, where everything changed. Subscribe and like plug. Start before Chapter 1. If you enjoy real-life stories of quiet strength and surprising turns, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Tell me in the comments, what city are you listening from? Now, let me tell you what happened to me. If you stay with me, I promise you this. There's a secret that made millions of people watch, a betrayal that felt like a knife, and a lesson about what happens when generations stop listening to one another. But if you only knew what I discovered after the dinner, you would understand why I never regret standing up that night. Christmas was always sacred to me. Even after Harold died, I continued the rituals because rituals are how memory keeps people alive. I roasted the prime rib he used to tease me about. "You're trying to outdo every restaurant in town," he'd say, and I'd grin. I made my cranberry sauce, letting it sit and steep for 2 days until it smelled like all the winters I had ever known. Then there were the cookies. The recipe was simple: butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and the thing no one else had, tucked into a corner of the page in my grandmother's looping handwriting. Emma, a neighbor's granddaughter, had come over 3 weeks earlier to learn. She liked to say she wanted to inherit recipes, which made me laugh until I realized she was serious. I invited David and Brittany for dinner because there are still parts of me that hope for small miracles, that being together will smooth ripples, that polite conversation can disguise sharper things. Brittany arrived carrying a designer purse and a holiday-perfect smile that somehow didn't reach her eyes. She had always had opinions, but that night she turned opinion into an accusation. She swept into my living room with the kind of glance that catalogs and dismisses. "Your house is dated," she said loudly, scanning my curtains like a woman who shops at showrooms. "When are you going to modernize?" Words like that sting, but they pass. What she said next did not. She placed her handbag on the table and announced, in a voice that insisted on being heard, "Your poor old face is becoming an embarrassment to this family." Silence is merciless when it follows a sentence like that. You can hear each dining chair creak. I folded my napkin. It's a small act of control, folding linen the way you breathe in when you must be calm, and I folded it with the same economy I used to teach decimals to my third graders. I looked at David. He was my son, and he had the look of a man who will do anything to keep quiet the things he cannot fix. He nodded. "Finally, someone said it," he muttered, as if confirming a truth. At that moment I stood. I did it slowly because I have arthritis in my knees and because dignity travels in its own rhythm. I said, "Then I'm leaving." The timing of a phone call has the power to reshape a room. David's phone rang at that exact second, as if the world had decided to interrupt the humiliation. His hand shook when he reached for it. For a moment, none of us could hear the voice on the other end, only the rapid whisper of his breathing. Then his face went pale. The whole dinner leaned together to listen. There was something about a camera and an audience in that breathless second, the way our attention gathers when a story might tilt the future. "Did you know your mother just made the Forbes cover?" his boss's voice said, the words strangely bright and distant. For a second I felt an absurd, almost comic relief, Imagine, your daughter-in-law has called you an embarrassment, and one of the most respectable business magazines calls in to say otherwise. I smiled. What I did not know then, and what would make the rest of our lives bend, was what had caused that call. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been teaching Emma how to mix dough. She'd recorded a bit on her phone, a bright, simple clip of my hands folding flour into butter, of lavender falling like snow into the bowl. "Grandma Maggie makes the best cookies," she'd whispered into the camera, and the clip went up on a thing the kids call TikTok because she said maybe other little hands would want to learn. I was amused. I did not think it would change everything. As David listened and whispered, I stood in the doorway with my purse over my arm. "Merry Christmas," I said, and left the house with the same steadiness I had used to leave a classroom full of squabbling children, an exit threaded with purpose rather than spectacle. Outside, the moon was clear, and the December air was a slap of cold that made my cheeks sting and feel alive. I walked slowly to my car, thinking about the lavender in my jar on the windowsill, and about how fragile the small things are that keep us human. In my pocket, my phone buzzed once, a message saying, "Forbes wants an interview." I looked up at the house I had kept for decades and laughed in a way that surprised me. The laugh was soft, private, an exhale that felt like a promise. If you think this is a story of sudden luck, wait. There's a betrayal coming, and a decision that will force me to choose between family and the thing I'd been secretly building for years. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew one small thing with the blunt clarity of someone who has kept a secret recipe for decades. Sometimes the world will hand you a stage for reasons you cannot guess, and sometimes the best answer to humiliation is to keep moving forward. What I did next was the beginning of everything, and I will tell you about it in the next part. Have you ever been so dismissed that you felt invisible? What would you do if the world suddenly listened? Stay with me. You won't want to miss what comes after the call. The morning after Christmas, my kitchen looked like a memory someone had set down and forgotten. 2 crystal glasses by the sink, the good china drying on a towel, the napkin I had folded still creased like a small white book. I brewed coffee the way Harold liked it, strong, no nonsense, and set the mug by the window with the herb jars. Through the glass, the lavender stood thin and stubborn against the frost. I have always admired stubborn things that still smell sweet. My phone began to ring before 8. A number I didn't recognize left a careful voicemail. "Maria Rodriguez from Forbes. Miss Thompson, we'd love to feature you." Then a second one, and a third from a producer with a brisk coastal cadence. "Food Network casting here. Your class presence is so authentic." I listened to them with the detached calm an old teacher earns. When you've managed 30 children hopped up on cupcakes, you learn to let the first wave pass before deciding how to answer. Emma's mother texted a link. I tapped it and saw my own hands on a small screen. The bowl, the wooden spoon, the tiny snowfall of lavender. "My Grandma Maggie makes the most amazing cookies," Emma's voice whispered, and behind it, my own laugh. A sound I didn't realize carried so much of Harold in it until I heard it playing back to me. 2 million views, the counter said, a number so large it felt imaginary, like a child promising to be good forever. I could have called David. I could have called no one. Instead, I sat at the table with my small blue notebook, the one where I used to tally lunch counts and permission slips, and I began to write down everything the comments were asking for. "Please teach us how to make vanilla from scratch." My grandmother sewed on buttons while telling stories. "Could you show that?" "How do you start an herb garden in the snow?" Somewhere between line 4 and 5, something in me clicked into place with a soft, decisive sound. My life had not changed overnight. It had been writing itself, like a painting wound crooked on a nail finally set level. I returned Maria's call first. She was younger than my son, quick, warm, the kind of woman who listens with her whole face. 2 hours, she asked. In your kitchen, if possible. I said yes, because I have found that truth sits better on linoleum than on glass. Then I did a thing I had been taught for decades not to do. I let the next call roll to voicemail, and the next. It wasn't rudeness. It was triage. When you have something fragile in your hands, you don't pass it to the busiest person in the room. You hold it steady and name it. I named it quietly at the counter. Grandma's kitchen. It was not just recipes. It was the feel of a hem caught properly in an old Singer machine, the neat way a garden bed squares up with twine, the trick to reading a thermometer without a flinch. It was the way elders teach, by grace, by repetition, by stories tied to muscle memory, while younger hands light up with the relief of knowing they, too, can make and mend. I wrote until my coffee went cold, and the sun slid a square of light across the table. And then I did the second practical thing. I called Sarah. Sarah Chen once taught next door to me. She left our district to work in tech and never lost her classroom voice, the one that could cut through chaos without raising itself. Mags, she said, send me every link, every comment, every idea. I'll stand up a simple website tonight. Don't promise anything yet. Let's just give them a door to knock on. Sarah, I said, I don't want to be a novelty. I want to be useful. Then be useful at scale, she answered. We'll make it simple enough to hold. Before lunch, I changed my dress and set out 2 saucers, the chipped ones with the forget-me-nots. And when Maria arrived, she slipped off her coat like someone entering a sanctuary. We stood shoulder to shoulder, measuring flour. She asked questions without poking at wounds, and I answered without embroidery. When she asked why I thought people responded, I told her the plainest thing I know. Because we are lonely. Because we are hungry for someone to show us slowly. Because no one has time, and teaching requires time. She looked at the lavender plant and then at me. Are you prepared for what happens next? I'm 67, I said. If I'm not prepared now, I never will be. We spoke about what the piece would cover. Age as an asset, intergenerational exchange, the economics of small classes that pay elders fairly. I showed her my notebook pages with their practical bones, pricing that wouldn't shame anyone, a sliding scale for students who needed it, a platform fee barely there. She smiled at the sentence I had underlined twice. You can't buy wisdom in bulk. By the time she left, my kitchen smelled like sugar and something more precise, the heat of purpose. The afternoon bent toward evening, and I pulled on Harold's old cardigan to walk to the mailbox. Snow scratched at the sky. In the neighbor's window, I saw Emma's small face lit by a screen and waved. She waved back with the fierce concentration of a child who believes distance is no match for enthusiasm. On my porch, I paused. Years of making do had trained me to measure even hope, but this hope felt earned, like the clean click when a jar finally seals. I went inside, turned on the kettle, and found my way to the desk in Harold's den. The room still carried his steadiness, the map of Wisconsin, the box of golf tees he never used. I moved the tees, set my notebook down, and began drafting a simple page Sarah could plug into a site. Learn with us. Teach with us. A form that asked more about memories than metrics. A promise that what we share will be slow enough to keep. At 6, David called again. I let it ring. The voicemail came with the tired breath of a man who has realized the cost of a nod. Mom, please, Brittany didn't mean, can we talk? I listened, and then I did something that felt like setting the table for company. I opened my calendar and penciled, call David back when ready. I am not cruel. I am careful. There is a difference. Sarah texted a link at 9:12 p.m. The site was clean and sturdy as a farmhouse bench, profiles for instructors, booking for students, a place for stories. "Don't tell anyone yet," she wrote. "Let the Forbes piece point the way." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, and then pressed my palm against the desk, the way one does at the end of a prayer. At midnight, I woke to the kind of certainty that used to send me down the hallway to check on sleeping students before a field trip. We would need insurance, a bank account separate from my household, an EIN, terms that protected our elders from ugliness. Practicalities, all of them. I wrote them down. I have always believed that reverence without structure is just sentiment. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Heavy paper, serifed logo, the sort of envelope that makes your hands behave. It was from a venture firm I had never heard of, forwarded by Maria. "We loved the angle of your story and would like to discuss supporting your platform's early build." I set it beside my grandmother's recipe card and laughed out loud, a sound so bright the lavender shrugged off a fleck of sunlight. That evening I answered David. We spoke like two people on a narrow bridge, careful not to lean too hard. He said the right words. "I'm sorry, I was wrong," and I let them sit. Some words need time to become true. When he asked to come over, I said gently, "Book a class, David. We'll cook and talk." It startled him. I heard it in the small silence that followed. But he agreed. Boundaries can be merciful when they are clear. Before I went to bed, I opened Sarah's link again and hovered over the button that would make the site visible to search. I didn't click. Instead, I walked to the window, set my hand on the cool pane, and watched the streetlight spill its simple gold onto the snow. In the quiet, my phone buzzed with a new message. An address on the east side of town, a conference room, a time. "Crossroads Ventures," the subject line said. "Initial meeting." I felt the smallest tremor run through me. Not fear exactly, but the thrill of stepping onto a floor you helped lay. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway, a silhouette in my own house, a woman with flour still dusting the edge of her sleeve. Tomorrow I would meet strangers with checkbooks and questions. Tomorrow I would learn whether this small, stubborn idea could hold against the bright machinery of business. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was who else would be sitting at that table, and which familiar voice would offer me the one deal I could not afford to take. I have been a school teacher most of my life, and teachers know this: preparation is everything. You don't walk into a classroom without a lesson plan, and you certainly don't walk into a meeting with investors without knowing your material better than they know their own. So I prepared. The days after Christmas were a blur of notebooks, scribbled calculations, and coffee rings on Harold's old desk. I built a budget on yellow legal pads, listing every possible expense: web hosting, liability insurance, advertising, instructor payments. I laughed when I caught myself adding paper towels to the line items. But I wasn't wrong. Paper towels and good ideas both run out fast. Sarah came over every evening, her laptop glowing like a lantern in the den. She showed me slide templates, graphs, words like market opportunity and scalability. I admitted to her that my idea of a graph had always been a bar chart showing reading progress for third graders. She only smiled. "Don't worry, Mags. The story is stronger than any spreadsheet. We'll give them both." We rehearsed. I stood at my counter holding note cards, explaining Grandma's kitchen to the toaster, to the kettle, to the photograph of Harold on the wall. I imagined him smirking, saying, "You always were a natural storyteller." The truth is, teaching is storytelling. You keep people's attention. You break things into steps. You build to a moment they remember. That was all I needed to do, only now my classroom was a boardroom. The morning of the meeting, I put on the navy suit I had bought for Harold's funeral and never worn again. It fit a little looser than it had 3 years ago, but dignity does not require perfection. It requires presence. I carried my grandmother's leather briefcase, scuffed at the corners, and felt the weight of every woman in my family pressing me forward. Crossroads Ventures was on the 15th floor of a glass building in downtown Madison. I had to stop myself from gasping at the view. The lake, the ice shining like pewter. But I told myself not to behave like a tourist. I was here for business. The receptionist led me into a conference room where the table gleamed under recessed lights. A young woman entered with the quick stride of someone used to making million-dollar decisions before lunch. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, 35, sharp suit, handshake firm, but not crushing. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, smiling, "I've read Maria's draft for Forbes. Fascinating story. Let's hear it in your own words." My palms were damp, but my voice was steady. I began with Emma's video. I described the flood of comments, the hunger for skills that families had let slip away. I told them about Mrs. Patterson's quilting, Mr. Anderson's woodworking, Elena's kitchen classes. "We are not just preserving recipes," I said. "We are preserving connection, the kind you can't buy, the kind that holds communities together." Jennifer leaned forward, eyes bright. "You're saying this is more than nostalgia." "Exactly," I said. "This is demand. Look at how many young people pay for online courses. Look at the loneliness surveys. Look at the heritage they want but can't find." I clicked the remote Sarah had given me, and on the screen appeared the testimonials we had gathered. I never learned to sew a button. I would give anything to bake my grandma's biscuits again. "Please, just teach us slowly, the way elders do." For a moment, the room went very quiet. Then Jennifer nodded. "The numbers are compelling. Conservative projections could give you 50,000 active users in the first year. But I'm more interested in proof of concept. Have you tested this?" I opened my laptop and pulled up our pilot. 15 seniors, 43 students, all learning together over video calls in living rooms. Photos of quilts, tables set with homemade tortillas, wooden shelves standing straight and proud. Jennifer laughed softly, shaking her head. "This is real, and it's beautiful." She asked about money. I told her what we needed. $200,000 for the first year. Platform development, marketing, operations. I held my breath. She sat back, crossed her arms, and studied me like a puzzle she intended to solve. "We'll come back to the exact numbers," she said. "But tell me this, are you prepared for the attention? Because with Forbes about to run your story, you won't be just a grandmother with cookies. You'll be a symbol, and symbols get challenged." Her words landed heavier than I expected. I thought of David, of Brittany's smirk, of all the little humiliations I had endured quietly. I thought of every time I had been told, "That's nice, but not practical," when I spoke of my dreams, and I knew I was ready. "I've been underestimated for 67 years, I told her. "I know exactly how to handle it." Jennifer smiled. "Then, Mrs. Thompson, I think we may have ourselves a deal." 3 days later, the offer came in writing. Not $200,000 for 20% equity, as I had requested, but $300,000 for 25%. Sarah whooped when she saw the email. "Mags, they believe in this. They want in." I signed the paperwork with Harold's old fountain pen, the one that always smudged my fingers. My hands shook, but not from fear, from the weight of beginning again, properly. The same week, Forbes hit the stands. My face, lined, silver-haired, laughing with Emma as we rolled cookie dough, smiled from the cover. The headline read, "The Grandmother Revolution: How One Woman's Recipe is Disrupting Education." When I walked into the grocery store, strangers stopped me at the dairy aisle. "You're the cookie lady," they said, and I laughed until my ribs ached. That evening, David called. For the first time in weeks, I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice uneven. "I saw the Forbes article. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked out my kitchen window at the herb garden, the lavender bent under snow. "When would I have told you, David? Between being called an embarrassment and being asked to modernize my face?" He went silent, and I let the silence stretch. Teachers know silence can be a lesson. Finally, he said, "Can we talk in person?" I said the only thing that felt right. "You can book a session through my website like everyone else." He sighed, but he agreed, and that was the beginning of something I did not yet recognize. Because while I was learning to trust my own voice, David was already being courted by someone else, someone who saw in him not my son, but my weakness. David arrived on a Saturday afternoon, a bouquet of supermarket roses in his hand, their petals already bruised. He looked like a boy again, shifting from foot to foot on my porch, though he is 42 with a mortgage and a career I barely understood. "Mom," he said, holding out the flowers. "I thought these might, brighten things up." I took them with a polite smile. "Thank you, David, though next time I can show you how to cut from the garden. They'll last longer and smell better, too." I said it lightly, but I watched his cheeks redden. He followed me into the kitchen like a student summoned after recess. I had set the counter for a lesson: carrots, potatoes, a cut of beef, onions already peeled. "Traditional Sunday pot roast," I told him. "It'll cost you $45. That's the class rate. You did book properly, didn't you?" He tried to laugh, but it came out strained. "Yes, Mom. I paid online." "Good." I tied an apron around his waist, one of Harold's old ones with "Kiss the Cook" embroidered across the chest. I watched my son, once so small his fists could barely hold a bat, clumsily knot the apron strings with the same hands that now signed corporate contracts. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, picking up the carrots. "About Christmas, about Brittany, about me." "Sorry for what exactly?" I asked, sliding the beef into the pan to sear. "Sorry she said it, or sorry you agreed?" He flinched. "Both. All of it. I never realized how much we were dismissing you, taking you for granted." I taught him how to brown the meat, how to stir without scorching, how to layer vegetables for even cooking. He chopped onions with awkward precision, the knife trembling but his jaw set. "Cooking isn't just following directions," I said. "It's knowing when to wait, when to stir, when to leave it alone. Knowledge passed down. You can't Google timing." He nodded, silent, perhaps for the first time in his adult life listening to me without correcting or explaining. As the roast slid into the oven, we sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the cookies that had started it all. David stared at them, then at me. "Brittany feels terrible," he offered. "She wants to apologize." "Does she?" I sipped slowly. "Or does she want access to whatever benefits she thinks my sudden success might bring?" He winced. "That's harsh, Mom." "Is it wrong?" I asked. He couldn't meet my eyes, and his silence was answer enough. "David," I continued more gently, "I love you. You'll always be my son. But I am not going backward. I'm not the lonely widow waiting for your visits anymore. I'm building something important, something that matters." He nodded again, his shoulders sagging, and I felt a twinge of pity. But I also felt clarity, sharp and liberating. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection. That week, Grandma's kitchen grew faster than I could keep up with. The Forbes cover brought hundreds of emails, dozens of inquiries, and more stories than I could possibly answer. Young women begging to learn their grandmother's quilting stitches, college students desperate to preserve recipes before their elders passed, fathers wanting to fix, not just buy, toys for their children. Sarah's prototype was humming, and instructors were joining by the day. Mrs. Patterson's quilting class had a waiting list. Elena's Salsa Verde course sold out in hours. Even grumpy Mr. Anderson had warmed to the idea once he realized he could charge $75 a session to teach someone how to build a bookshelf. Every night, I sat in my den reading testimonials until my eyes blurred. "This isn't just about skills," one student wrote. "It's about feeling connected to someone who cares." But success has a way of calling shadows. One evening, Sarah arrived with her laptop, her face pale. She sat at my table without even taking off her coat. "Mags, we need to talk. There's a company circling." I blinked. "Circling?" "Peterson Industries," she said grimly. "Big money. They've been sniffing around since the Forbes piece. They specialize in swallowing small startups, copy the idea, outspend the founder, bury the original." I felt my stomach tighten. "And us?" "They've already registered domains similar to ours," Sarah said, turning her screen to me. "Grandma Exchange, Heritage Hub, Senior Skills Online. They're preparing something, and they've got funding we can't touch." I stared at the glowing screen. The names felt cold, metallic, stripped of the warmth that made our idea alive. "They think you're a novelty, Mags," Sarah whispered. "A sweet story, easy to outcompete with cash and marketing." I folded my napkin again, just as I had on Christmas night, a small gesture to steady myself. "Then they don't know teachers," I said. "We see bullies for what they are." But deep down, I sensed the storm coming. 2 days later, David called again. His tone was oddly clipped, professional, like he was reading from a script. "Mom, I've been talking to some people. There are opportunities. I think you should hear them out." My chest tightened. "Which people, David?" He hesitated just a moment too long. "Peterson Industries. They want to help you scale. They say you could partner instead of compete." I felt the blood drain from my face. My son, my own son, speaking the name of the wolf circling my door. "David Hein," I said slowly. "We'll talk another time." I hung up and sat very still, the lavender jar faintly scenting the room. My hands trembled not with age, but with recognition. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it knocks on your door carrying roses. The email arrived on a Monday morning in January. The subject line read, "Introducing Wisdom Exchange, a new way to learn from seniors." I clicked once, and my stomach twisted. The layout was painfully familiar. Smiling elders offering classes, cheerful copy about time-honored skills, thumbnails of workshops in kitchens and living rooms, the colors, the fonts, even the phrasing, so close to ours that if you squinted, you might think you'd landed on Grandma's kitchen. But it wasn't ours. At the top, in bold letters, was a name that made my throat go dry. Peterson Industries. Sarah came over within the hour, laptop under her arm, eyes wide with disbelief. She pulled up both sites side by side. Ours was clean, modest, built with love. Theirs was glossy, polished, and, thanks to their budget, already saturating social media ads. "They've copied everything," she whispered. "Even the wording of your testimonials. Look." She scrolled, and I saw my own words echoed back to me in sterile corporate fonts. "You can't buy wisdom in bulk," except now it was wisdom at scale, Peterson's shiny slogan. "They poached," Sarah added, clicking another tab. "Mrs. Patterson's quilting workshop, Elena's cooking classes, Anderson's carpentry. Look. My heart lurched. Faces I loved stared back at me from Peterson's homepage, their smiles rehearsed, their skills packaged as content. I sank into a chair. They promised them money, didn't they? Sarah nodded. Higher pay, signing bonuses, contracts that look generous. Until you read the fine print, they know exactly what they're doing. This is a hostile takeover dressed in kindness. I pressed my palm to my forehead, feeling the heat of betrayal rise. These weren't strangers. They were my neighbors, my friends. But desperation speaks louder than loyalty when bills are due. For 40 years, I had taught children how to read between the lines. Now I had to teach myself. That afternoon, I called Mrs. Patterson. Her voice shook when she answered. "Margaret, please don't be upset. They offered health coverage. My quilting barely covers groceries. I couldn't say no." I wanted to argue, to plead, but instead I said softly, "I understand. Just be careful. They don't see you the way I do." When I hung up, I stared at the lavender plant on my windowsill. Its stems were dry, brittle under the winter sun, but still fragrant. You can lose the bloom and keep the essence. That thought steadied me. By Wednesday, 12 instructors had left. Our student count dropped by half. Emails poured in. "Are you shutting down? Should I switch to Peterson's site?" I answered each one calmly, firmly. We are not closing. We are still here. We are not giving up. But inside, I felt like a teacher whose class had emptied while the children ran to a shinier playground. Thursday night, Sarah and I sat in my kitchen with mugs of tea, exhaustion etched on both our faces. "They have marketing budgets in the millions," she said. "We can't compete with that." I folded my napkin, steadying my hands. "We don't need to outspend them. We need to outlast them." "How?" Sarah asked. "They've already branded themselves as the legitimate platform. If they push hard enough, they could bury us in months." I looked at the clock, ticking loud in the quiet kitchen, then at Harold's photograph on the mantel. "Bullies always make the same mistake," I said slowly. "They underestimate the people they think are small." The next morning, Forbes published a follow-up article by Maria. The headline read, "David versus Goliath, How Corporate Giants Target Senior Entrepreneurs." The piece laid out the similarities between our platform and Peterson's, interviewed instructors who admitted they'd been lured by money, and even uncovered an internal email from Peterson executives calling us the geriatric competition. The article hit like a thunderclap. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages of support. Readers were outraged. How dare they steal from a grandmother? How dare they mock seniors as disposable? For a moment, I thought we might actually have turned the tide, but Peterson struck back faster than I imagined. By Monday, a thick envelope arrived by courier, legal papers stamped with the cold authority of a corporation. They accused us of stealing their trade secrets. They filed for injunctions to freeze our operations while the case proceeded. I read the papers 3 times, the legal language heavy as stone. They knew they would lose in court, but they also knew lawsuits cost money and small businesses bleed faster than giants. Sarah looked at me across the table, eyes tired but fierce. "This is harassment, plain and simple." I poured her another cup of tea, hands steady despite the storm inside me. "They think they can exhaust us into surrender," I said, "but they don't know what stubbornness a grandmother can summon." That night, as the snow pressed against the windows, my phone rang again. David's number lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk. I can help with this Peterson problem." My heart skipped. "How would you know anything about it?" He hesitated. Then, too smoothly, "I have connections. Let me come over. Tonight." I looked at the lavender on the sill, brittle but fragrant, and knew in my bones this wasn't help. This was something else. David arrived just after 8 o'clock, the January night sharp with cold. He didn't bring roses this time. He came in wearing a wrinkled shirt, collar bent, tie hanging loose like he had pulled it off in the car. He carried no flowers, no peace offering, only the look of a man trying to justify himself. I had already set 2 mugs of coffee on the table. Old habit, teachers always prepare before the lesson begins. "Mom," he said, sliding into a chair, his voice uneven. "Please hear me out." I nodded once. "Go ahead." He folded his hands, then unfolded them, his knuckles white. "Peterson Industries hired me 6 weeks ago, right after the Forbes cover. They said they needed someone who understood you, your vision, your model, the way you think." The words landed like stones, one after the other. I felt the air in the room thin, as though the walls were leaning inward. "You've been working for them," I said slowly, testing each syllable like it might splinter in my mouth. "Yes," he admitted, eyes fixed on the table. "They promised me double my consulting fee. They said if I helped bring you into a partnership, you'd be protected. They'd handle the legal mess, the scaling, the investors. You could focus on teaching while they ran the business side." "Protected," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Or controlled," he flinched. "Mom, you don't understand how big they are. Small businesses like yours. They don't survive against giants. Partnering was the practical choice. You'd be rich, comfortable. Isn't that what you want?" I leaned forward, my voice steady but sharp. "David, I have spent 67 years being told what's practical. I was told teaching was practical instead of chasing my own dreams. I was told staying quiet was practical when people dismissed me. Practical is the word they use when they want women to sit down and not make trouble." His face crumpled. "I thought I was protecting you." "No," I said, my throat tightening. "You were protecting yourself, your job, your image, your paycheck." The silence stretched long, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at my son, the boy I raised alone for 5 years while Harold worked overseas, the boy I'd taken to Little League games after grading 30 math tests, the boy whose hair I cut in our kitchen when money was tight. And here he sat, a man paid to betray me. "David," I said finally, my voice low but clear, "leave." "Mom, leave." He stood, shoulders slumped, eyes wet but defiant. "You're making a mistake. You can't fight them. They'll crush you." I rose to my feet, slow but deliberate. "Maybe, but I will not hand them my soul to avoid a fight." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment he looked like he wanted to hug me, to beg me to take it back. Instead, he walked out, the door clicking shut behind him with the kind of finality that echoes in your bones. I sat back down at the table, staring at the lavender plant on the sill. Its stems bent under winter frost, but still release their fragrance if you touch them. Strength can be fragile and unyielding at once. I wiped my eyes and whispered, "I will not let them take this from me." The next morning, Sarah burst into the kitchen with her laptop, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mags, it's worse than we thought." She set the computer in front of me. On the screen, an internal Peterson email, leaked to Maria at Forbes. The words cut like knives. "The grandmother problem can be eliminated with aggressive legal tactics. Once we've extracted their teaching content, we won't need them." I pressed my palm against the table. "The grandmother problem," I repeated. Sarah's hand shook. "They're using David. He gave them insights into our platform. That's how they move so fast. They think you'll fold." I breathed out slowly, forcing the anger into something sharper. Then they've forgotten what I taught for 40 years. Sarah frowned. What's that? That you don't underestimate a classroom full of underestimated people. By Friday, the exodus had worsened. More instructors signed with Peterson, lured by bonuses and promises of exposure. Our student list shrank daily. The legal notices piled up, each one heavier than the last. Elena came by that evening, her apron still dusted with flour. She set a pot of soup on my stove without asking. Mija, you look terrible. Eat, then plan. I smiled weakly, grateful for her steadiness. Plan, yes, but not the way Peterson expects. Because Peterson believed they could copy recipes, contracts, and names, but they didn't understand that teaching is not just information. It is story. It is touch. It is mistakes corrected with a laugh. That cannot be cloned. That night, I sat at my desk in Harold's old den, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The lawsuit loomed. The betrayal of my son pressed heavy on my chest, and the world felt colder than the Wisconsin snow outside. But then I thought of Emma, her small voice on that TikTok video. Grandma Maggie makes the best cookies. And I realized she hadn't said the cookies were perfect. She had said they were the best because they carried something more than taste. They carried love. So I began to write, not a surrender, not a business plan, a strategy, one that used Peterson's arrogance against them, one that relied not on dollars, but on the difference between corporate content and lived wisdom. I wrote until midnight, my hand cramping, my heart steady. When I set the pen down, I whispered into the quiet, they wanted a war. They will have one, but on my terms. The following Monday, as snow clung to the windows and the kettle hissed, I gathered Sarah and Elena in my kitchen. I laid out the plan in simple, deliberate words. When I finished, Sarah's eyes widened, then narrowed with something that looked like hope. Elena crossed her arms, her voice fierce. They think they can silence grandmothers? They are about to learn. I nodded. Yes, but first we need to gather the others, and we need to do it quickly. Because Peterson had stolen our name, our faces, our classes. But they had forgotten one simple truth every teacher knows. Copying the notes doesn't mean you understand the lesson. I called the meeting for Saturday morning. Snow still lay heavy on the roofs, icicles sharp as teeth on the gutters. But inside my kitchen, the heat of determination made the air hum. Around my table sat Sarah with her ever-glowing laptop, Elena with flour still on her sleeves, Mr. Anderson smelling faintly of sawdust, and 5 others who had not yet signed Peterson's contracts. I looked at them one by one. Some were nervous, some angry, but all were listening. I'm not here to beg anyone to come back, I began. I respect the choices people make when they have bills to pay, but I need you to understand something Peterson will never admit. They don't value us. To them, we're content, not people. They'll film your techniques, strip them of story, and sell them like cheap trinkets. What they can't steal is the heart behind what we teach. Mrs. Patterson, who had been quiet until then, lifted her chin. So what do? We can't compete with their money. No, I said. We compete with what they can't buy. Sarah clicked her laptop, showing screenshots of complaints flooding Peterson's site. Students saying the recipes didn't taste right, that the classes felt robotic, that something was missing. That missing piece, I said, is us, the real us, our quirks, our stories, the laughter when a pie collapses, the way our hands guide theirs. Wisdom can't be scripted. Elena slapped her palm on the table. So we give the students what Peterson can't. Exactly, I said. Private workshops, in living rooms, garages, backyards, small circles where stories and skills are shared the old way. with hands and eyes, not cameras and contracts. No platform owns that. Anderson frowned. But won't Peterson sue us? Not if we're careful, Sarah said. These are private gatherings, friends teaching friends. They can't regulate what happens in a kitchen or a quilting circle. I could feel the room shift, fear bending into possibility. By the next week, the first workshops bloomed like wildflowers. Mrs. Patterson hosted quilting circles in her living room, sunlight falling across fabric as needles flashed. Elena opened her kitchen to small groups, teaching salsa verde and tamales, with stories of her mother stirring pots in Mexico City. Mr. Anderson let young fathers into his garage, showing them how to sand wood smooth enough for dollhouse walls. I hosted Sunday afternoons in my own kitchen. 5 students crowded around as I showed them the lavender jar, sprinkling just enough into cookie dough to make the air fragrant. They laughed, they spilled flour, they burned a batch, and loved every minute. What Peterson delivered in sterile videos, we brought alive in laughter and shared meals. Word spread fast. Students told friends, who told neighbors. Bookings filled before I could answer emails. The irony was sharp. Peterson's greed had pushed us out of their shadow and into something stronger, a community. But Peterson noticed. One Friday morning, my phone rang. The caller ID froze me. Robert Peterson. I let it ring twice, then answered with steady calm. Mrs. Thompson, a deep voice said, "We need to talk." I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. "You can book a session through my website like everyone else." Silence, then a clipped laugh. "You're clever, but clever doesn't win against capital. We have instructors, investors, and reach you can't dream of." "Do you?" I said softly. "Because from where I sit, you have glossy videos and empty classes." His tone sharpened. "This is your last chance. Partner with us, or be buried under lawsuits." I looked at the lavender plant on my sill, new shoots pushing through despite the frost. "Mr. Peterson, I spent 40 years teaching children who thought they could cheat their way through class. They always learned the hard way that copying notes isn't the same as learning the lesson." Before he could answer, I hung up. That night, Maria Rodriguez from Forbes came by with her notepad and recorder. She listened as I explained the workshops, the complaints on Peterson's platform, the joy blooming in living rooms across Wisconsin. "David versus Goliath," she murmured, scribbling. "Only this time the slingshot is story." I poured her tea and smiled. "Write it, Maria. Write the truth. People need to know you can't corporatize community." She promised she would. By the following week, the shift was undeniable. Peterson's glossy ads still littered the internet, but the ground was moving beneath them. Students left their site in droves, finding their way to our workshops. Seniors who had once felt invisible were suddenly teachers in demand, and every time I saw a new face at my table, eager hands reaching for flour or scissors or wood, I felt the same spark. This is what they'll never steal. But storms never die quietly. On Wednesday evening, as I wiped down my counters after a class, headlights flared in my driveway. I peeked through the curtain and froze. David's car, alone. He stepped out, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. He looked nothing like the man who had left my kitchen weeks ago, and when he walked in, his voice broke before he even sat down. "They fired me, Mom." David sat at my kitchen table, shoulders slumped, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. He looked older than his 42 years, like the boy I had raised had been replaced by a man hollowed out by regret. "They fired me this morning," he said, his voice breaking. "Peterson Industries. They said I wasn't useful anymore once you refused their partnership." I poured him coffee, setting the mug gently in front of him. So you've been discarded, the way they plan to discard all of us. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. I thought I was being smart, Mom. I thought I could protect you by bringing you under their umbrella. They promised security, money, stability. I didn't realize they only wanted access to your students, your instructors, your ideas. Once they got what they needed from me, they tossed me aside. The shame in his voice was heavier than the lawsuits piling on my counter. I looked at my son, the man who had betrayed me, and felt the complicated tangle of love and hurt twist inside me. David, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself. You believed the lie that convenience is stronger than character. Tears filled his eyes. Is there any way I can fix this? I glanced at Sarah, who had been listening quietly from the corner, arms crossed, her face a mask of skepticism. Then at Elena, who stirred a pot of soup on my stove, her eyes kind but firm. Maybe, I said softly, but not today. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. You'll have to show me step by step that you've learned the lesson Peterson never did. You can't cheat your way to respect. The next weeks were war. Peterson launched wave after wave of legal challenges, each one designed to drain us dry. Their lawyers filled my mailbox with thick envelopes of threats, claiming patent infringement and trade secrets. But Maria at Forbes worked tirelessly, publishing article after article about corporate bullying and senior resilience. The public rallied behind us. Letters arrived daily, from students, from grandparents, from strangers across the country who saw themselves in our fight. And then came the collapse. It started with the students. They abandoned Peterson's sterile platform in droves, frustrated by lifeless lessons and recipes that never tasted right. Complaints flooded social media. This feels fake. There's no heart. It's not like learning from Grandma's kitchen. Next, the instructors grew restless. Peterson had promised them bonuses, but the fine print twisted those promises into dust. Contracts locked them into producing endless content with no ownership. One by one, they broke ranks, some returning quietly to our community workshops, others simply walking away. Finally, the investors noticed. With users dwindling and bad press mounting, Peterson's shiny clone looked less like a revolution and more like a scam. Funding dried up. Lawsuits were withdrawn, not out of grace, but out of bankruptcy. The day the news broke, Wisdom Exchange shuts down amid scandal. Sarah hugged me so hard my ribs ached. Elena cried openly into her apron. And I baked cookies, because victory, like grief, tastes better when shared warm. A month later, Peterson himself arrived on my porch, not with lawyers this time, but with defeat in his eyes. He carried no briefcase, no arrogance, only the look of a man who had underestimated the wrong opponent. "Mrs. Thompson," he said stiffly, "I came to apologize." I poured him coffee, because hospitality costs nothing, but I did not invite him further than the kitchen. Maria from Forbes sat at the table, pen poised. He paled when he saw her. "You tried to crush us," I told him plainly. "You mocked us as a grandmother problem. But what you failed to understand is simple. Grandmothers don't quit. We've raised children through storms, buried husbands, balanced ledgers with pennies. We don't scare easily," he nodded, face tight. "We miscalculated." "No," I said, folding my napkin carefully. "You disrespected us, and that is always a losing strategy." Maria captured every word. The next morning, the headline read, "The Grandmother Who Beat Corporate America." David came back slowly, cautiously, over the weeks that followed. He volunteered at workshops, setting up chairs, cleaning dishes, listening more than he spoke. For once, he didn't try to lead. He simply showed up. One Sunday, As we cleaned up after a pot roast lesson, he handed me the dish towel and said, "Mom, I see it now. You weren't just teaching cookies, you were teaching people how to belong again." I met his eyes, saw sincerity there, and let a small smile bloom. That's the first step, David. Keep walking. Brittany, however, did not return. She filed for divorce a month after Peterson's collapse, citing irreconcilable differences. I can't say I was surprised. Some people only know how to stay near light when it flatters them. When the shadows arrive, they run. 6 months later, Grandma's kitchen was bigger than anything I dared imagine. We partnered with senior centers across the Midwest, then across the country. Universities adopted our model into continuing education programs. A production company greenlit a TV show, my cookbook, Lavender and Legacy, Recipes That Last, went to print. But none of that mattered as much as the letters. One came from Emma, the little girl whose video had started it all. She wrote in careful cursive, "Dear Grandma Margaret, thank you for showing me that knowledge is the best inheritance. I'm teaching my friends how to bake cookies now. We laugh when we spill flour, but we always remember your lavender. Love, Emma." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears warm on my cheeks. On a quiet evening, I stood on my porch, keys in my hand, watching the sun set over the herb garden. Lavender pushed up through the soil, stubborn and fragrant, no matter the frost. I thought of the woman I had been, the widow folding napkins to hold herself steady, the embarrassment dismissed at her own Christmas table, and I thought of the woman I had become, entrepreneur, teacher, fighter, grandmother who discovered her worth was never gone, only waiting to be claimed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't even revenge. Sometimes it's building something so strong, so enduring, that the people who doubted you are forced to watch you shine. At 68, I wasn't finished. I was just beginning. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. If it touched your heart, please support it with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss the next one. I'd also love to know, what city are you listening from today? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Until the next story, take care, and I'll see you soon.